My parents came home and said, well, your teacher said, we really like, this is kindergarten, we really like having Trevor in the class, but if he could just learn to talk a little bit more softly. So if I'm screaming at you, I'm going to blame it on this because I usually don't need these. If you have your Bibles this morning, would you open them to Matthew 6, verses 25 to 34. And I believe this is parts of the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 6, 25, 34. Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink. Not about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap. You know, you practice this about 6 times, and I swear I'm not going to get emotional, but I'm already about 2 seconds in, and I think this is already going to happen. So let's just get it out of the way, I guess, right? Look at how the birds of the air, they neither reap nor they neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, and let your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more of value than they? The verse that I want to talk about today is, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. I don't want to be married to you anymore. We were on our way to Redmond Airport, just pulling into the drop-off area when my wife said these words to me. I was going to see an old friend in Southern California in the spring of 2017 and was expecting the usual, tell Alan hi for me and call me when you get there. My wife stopped along the security drop-off area and put the car into park. Excuse me? I said. I'm serious, she replied. Not being one to show my hand, I calmly said, okay, I guess we'll have to talk about this later, as the security guard started to approach our car. I got out of the car, said goodbye, and flew to Southern California with a very sick feeling in my stomach. After returning home, not much was said about our discussion in the car. I was trying to pretend that nothing was wrong, and when told, I'm going to start doing more things with my friends, I tried to be encouraging and supportive. As the weeks passed by and the warmer weather of summer approached, it became more and more obvious that I couldn't wish away anything. Communication had broken down in our house. My wife had moved into another bedroom, and our teenage children kept to themselves. Our family was disintegrating. On June 26, 2017, at 5:30, I poured myself a drink, as I had done countless times. Lifted it to my lips, sniffed the intoxicating aroma, and sat the drink down. I grabbed my headphones and walked out the door to take a walk at Pine Nursery Park, right over here. As I crossed the irrigation canal into the park, I changed from music to a book on tape by Eckhart Tolle, of all people, who my Oprah-inspired sisters had recommended I give a try. His soft, new age voice was soothing and somehow got my attention, despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through my mind. As he was going on about quieting the mind and a lot of other new age things, he surprisingly quoted a Bible verse, Matthew 6:28. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, neither toil nor spin. I stopped. That wave of emotion that precedes tears swept over me, and I was powerless to stop it. And sure enough, the tears followed right on cue as I stood there, a weeping, broken man. Thankfully, no one was watching, unlike today. I pulled myself together and returned home. Whatever had happened on that walk was quickly lost as my wife had returned home from work and announced she was going to go camping with friends. By this point, I'd seen enough to know what was going on and was being fed some information about who this friend was. I was angry, bitter, horribly depressed, and was facing someone who was smiling, confident, and deliberate, It was late, and I went to bed. I tossed and turned, thoughts racing through my head. How is this happening? What did I do? What will the kids say? Who is he? Maybe I should get up, Trevor, leave right now. I've always been skeptical of stories of God talking to people. My view has always been that he only talks to prophets. When it happens to you, that all changes. It's not loud, it's not boisterous. It's a soft, deliberate, and brief voice. It had never happened to me before, and it hasn't happened since, but it happened. I know what my crazy thoughts sound like, and this wasn't one of those. After hearing those words, I thought of the few Bible verses I could remember. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. I jumped out of bed. It was 11:45. I was still angry and bitter, but now I was on a mission. I grabbed a laundry basket filled with newly washed clothes, announced my intentions. I was leaving and marched out the door and threw a laundry basket into the back of the truck. I was now packed. My 17-year-old daughter, who hearing the whole commotion, ran out in front, tears streaming down her face, and said, "Dad, will you take this with you?" It was a little pillow that she'd sewed by hand with the words, "World's greatest dad." I gave her a big hug, told her I would not be gone long, but that I had to get my head clear and that I would come back for her. Oh, thank you. Boy, I never knew I was the boy. I wasn't thinking ahead, that's for sure. Thank you. I gave her a big hug and told her I would not be gone long and that I had to get my head clear and that I would come back for her. We drove over together to a friend's house where my son was spending the night and dragged him out of bed to tell him what was going on. We all shed a few tears, hugged, and said goodbye. I dropped my daughter back off at our house, drove west on Empire, turned left onto 97 South, drove into the darkness. Did you know that Ellen White liked shellfish? An entire class of 30 students started glancing up during the 3-hour weekly E.G. White in the church class when our professor said these. The professor had been the curator of the E.G. White estate in Battle Creek, Michigan, and now was teaching a class on her at La Sierra University. I was a 7th-year senior at La Sierra, desperately trying to graduate and gearing up for a 2-year stint in the mission field. My parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, friends, all are Seventh-day Adventists. My dad was a boarding school music teacher with stints at Cheyenne River Academy, Georgia Cumberland Academy, and Maplewood Academy. My mother started working for Adventist Risk Management when my dad accepted a college position at La Sierra University in 1984, and she still works there to this day, although that's in between her retiring off and on. I know what a haystack is. I've played countless hands of rook. I've eaten suppers that only consisted of popcorn and fruit salad. I am keenly aware that it is okay to ride in the boat on Sabbath, but not ski behind the boat on Sabbath. I know you can wade in a stream on Sabbath, but not swim in it. Yes, it would be fair to say I was an SDA through and through. I had the lineage, education, experience, and all the credentials. My name is Trevor, and I am an alcoholic. No one wakes up one day and says, you know what, I want to be an alcoholic and destroy my life. Yet there I was, July of 2017, sitting in a church basement in downtown Bend, introducing myself to a room full of strangers as such. After my first meeting, many thoughtful, kind people came up to me and introduced themselves. All were very enthusiastic toward me, the newcomer. I went home that afternoon feeling a little better and noticed that I may have stumbled into something I could start looking forward to. So how does one become an alcoholic? It's a question that never gets asked until it's too late. I had my first drink in the spring of 1985 in the hills behind Two-Bit Mountain in Riverside, California. I was 15. The moment I took my first sip, I knew instantly that I liked it. The ease that rushed over me felt secure, confident, and oddly familiar. It was like being reunited with an old friend. Not much initially changed after that. There were no major drawbacks to drinking at all. Weekends were for partying and weekdays were for school and work. Things went on like that for quite a while. Every couple of years, if I checked in on myself, I would notice that Thursday was becoming the new Friday, and Hangovers could be dealt with, and I really enjoyed connecting with like-minded drinkers. As I neared graduating from college, I had been a partier for almost a decade. My life was starting to show some wear from the lifestyle I'd chosen. Nothing consequential, mind you. I simply had started erecting normal life activities around my drinking. For the uninitiated, it works a little bit like this. Hey, let's go down to San Felipe this weekend in Mexico and ride on the sand dunes down there. Sounds great. I'm in. Now, a normal group of people will prepare for a trip like this. 1, pull out the camping gear from the garage. 2, pick up an awning or a sun tent from a local store for some shade. 3, pack sandwich fixings from the fridge, call one of the other group members to coordinate some shared meal plans. Load a single cooler with all your food and ice. 4, load up the car and truck the night before departure. 5, get up early in the morning, drive to Mexico. The alcoholic plan works a little bit differently. 1, grab a 12-pack Thursday afternoon and start planning. 2, while consuming the first 12-pack, put 3 coolers out on the garage and set them down by the car. 3, call other group members and inquire how many coolers are you bringing. Tell them to bring them over and, grab another 12er on your way over. 4, drink with friends till 2 a.m. the night before departure. 5, get up early around 11 in the morning, drive to the grocery store, grab a cart, fill it with ice, beer, liquor, all the while grabbing sandwich fixings as you wind your way through the store, then leave for Mexico. This process becomes more and more embedded as time goes on. At first, it's limited to special events, birthdays, vacations, marriages, graduations, that sort of thing. Later, the word special expands its meaning to include holidays, weekends, Tuesday, 5 o'clock, and I'm stressed. None of this happens, however, overnight. No one wakes up under a bridge after their first big night of drinking. Well, most don't anyways. Back in the spring of 1995, and here I was, a soon-to-be college grad with no real plan. I wasn't terribly happy with my life. I wasn't attending church very often, but felt that God was trying to somehow maybe get my attention. I decided to go to church one weekend and heard a sermon about service. It really spoke to me. I'd been a student missionary in the Marshall Islands in the 1989-90 school year, and that experience that year was like no other. I got to teach in a classroom full of Pacific Islanders on a tiny coral atoll in the middle of the Pacific. And since I was 15, that time had represented the longest stretch of sobriety that I'd had up until that point. So while listening to that sermon, I felt the call. God wanted me to be a missionary again. This would solve all of my problems. I would be doing good, pleasing God, and I wouldn't have to drink anymore. It would all just work out. While listening to that, the principal of the Madro SDA school, Bruce Lane, that I'd served under in 1990 was still in the Marshall Islands. So I wrote him a letter inquiring about the possibility of coming back out there again to serve. I'd done a good job before, and several weeks later I received a reply letter from him, enthusiastically accepting me as a teacher for the next school year. In August of 1995, I packed up my belongings into a 76 linear inch U-Haul box, sold my car, said goodbye to my friends, had my parents drop me off at LAX, and flew 5,000 miles to Madro, Marshall Islands, where my new life would begin. You look skinny. I had returned to Bend a week after I had left that fateful night south on 97 on the 26th. This time with my parents in tow, who I'd been visiting at PUC in St. Helena. We'd driven back up to Bend to pick up my 14-year-old son, who had called me the night before in tears because he was all alone at home. I told him I'd leave the next morning to come and get him, and would he be okay for the next few hours alone. He said he could make it. So when I arrived at the house, I went inside to help my son bring the things to the car when my wife stepped out of the bedroom and said, "You look skinny." Earlier that week, while staying with my parents in St. Helena and agonizing over the betrayal of my wife and the disintegration of our family, I asked my dad if I could help him with a backyard project he'd been picking away at. My parents' backyard had been covered with blackberry bushes, and after torn out was a dry, parched strip of hard-packed dirt. I found a pick in the garden shed and started hacking away at that rock-hard dirt. Pick, 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 clink, pick, pick, clink, dirt, dirt, rock. Day after day, it went on like this. And by the end of the week, I'd made quite a bit of progress and even managed to seed a small section of the yard with grass. As I was cleaning up at the end of the day, I looked in the mirror and stopped. Is that my chin? So when my wife told me a few days later, you look skinny, I realized I hadn't unlocked some new gardening workout routine to lose weight, but that I hadn't had a drink in almost a week. This was my longest stretch of sobriety in 22 years. Smoking cigarettes and watching Captain Kangaroo, I plopped down into my beach chair and with a steaming plate of food. That sugary sand compressed underneath my weight, and the sun had just started to hit the horizon of the Pacific. The quest to see the elusive green spark was underway. I was camped for the weekend on the beautiful islet of Kalalan near the deep water channel of Majuro Lagoon. I was with my soon-to-be wife, our friends Dawn and Jan, and the local Pohnpeian caretaker, Harris. Life was good. We were the only ones on this deserted island. It had all the hallmarks of a postcard. Coconut trees leaning over white sandy beaches, lapping at the calm waters of the lagoon. There was music in the background, and the beach barbecue pit was wafting smells of dinner. As I started to dig into my plate of food, Jan and I and our best Statler Brothers bass voice started singing along to the 1963 hit, Flowers on the Wall. Smoking cigarettes and watching Captain Kangaroo. Boom! An explosion rocked our idyllic setting, and we heard someone screaming. I turned around, and my fiancée was screaming and running toward the jungle. The fire in the barbecue pit had exploded. My friend Don yelled, "The water's in the other direction." My fiancée turned around, continued screaming, and then raced towards the lagoon in the opposite direction. We soon discovered that she'd had put a can of beans in the fire without opening it. It exploded, blasting a hole clean through the grill rack, extinguishing the fire completely, and left the victim with second-degree bean burns all over her legs. Thankfully, the island caretaker, Harris, had an old first aid kit with a few burn packs in it, and my fiancée recovered over the next couple of weeks. However, we never found a single weenie that was on that grill. Altogether, I spent 7 years in the Marshall Islands. It was a time I look most fondly on to this day. I became a man, a husband, a father while living out there. However, I began to develop more bad habits. My time as a missionary had ended, and I moved into the regular community. I soon found myself back to drinking, bars, and had a new drinking buddy, my wife. The exploding chili bean incident was a funny, albeit painful, story that became part of a familiar theme of the drinking lifestyle. Chaos reigns in the drinking community. Stories of surviving stupidity are first-class citizens. Everyone has a yarn they love to spin, and I was beginning to collect spools of them. During this time in my life, however, things were about as good as it gets. I had a beautiful family, a good job at a community college. My wife worked at the U.S. Embassy, and we lived in an incredible home overlooking the lagoon that yielded tropical sunsets every single night. It was paradise, and I never wanted to leave. I'm not quitting, I am just taking a break. It's now back in the middle of June 2017, a few weeks removed from my fateful midnight departure down Highway 97. I now had both of my kids with me, and we were enjoying time together visiting family and friends in San Clemente, California. An old neighbor of mine had heard I was back in town and came down to the beach to see me and my kids. After explaining why my wife wasn't there, he asked, "Where's your beer?" I said, "I'm not quitting, I'm just taking a break." Alcoholics are stubborn people, and I was no exception. After nearly 2 weeks of white-knuckled sobriety, I was keeping my options open. I'd never tried to quit in my 32-year drinking history, and I had no intentions of making any sort of commitment after a 2-week break. I had friends, hobbies, and hopefully a contrite wife built around drinking. Why on earth would I commit to quitting all of that? I spent nearly a month in California in that summer of 2017. Somehow I managed to not drink the entire time. However, a broken marriage was waiting for all of us in Bend, Oregon, and it was time to face the music and drive home. It couldn't be avoided any longer. My kids and I said goodbye and started up I-5 North. We stopped in Bakersfield, where my wife's family was from, and visited her family there. We stopped again in St. Helena, and I saw my parents one more time, inching closer and closer to our unknown fate. After a short weekend in St. Helena, my folks walked us all out to the truck to say goodbye. They knew what was in front of us, and so did we. I'll never forget my dad looking at me and said, "You can do this." The miles slowly and painfully peeled off. Redding, Shasta, Weed, Doris, K Falls, Chiloquin. The anxiety built. What will she say? What can I say? Will she even be there? We eventually reached Bend and exited Empire. I could hardly sit still another minute. We pulled in the driveway and her car was parked out in front, but it was not in the driveway. She was standing in the front yard. I got out of the car. Tears were already starting to well up in my eyes, and I attempted to give her a hug. Her response was cold, unresponsive, and defiant. She told us right there that she'd moved out with all of her things while we were gone. We all stood in stunned silence as she got into her car and drove away. My kids then announced they were going to go see their friends, and I was left alone in the house. I went upstairs to the bedroom, walked into the large walk-in closet, and on the left side that ran all the way down the length of the upstairs was empty. No clothes, no shoes, 2 empty hangers. That's it. 23 years, it was over. Trev, your wife and kids are behind you. The island life was very good to me. I was a natural fit to living the slow, unassuming way of the Pacific Islanders. However, all good things must come to an end, and I was getting a lot of pressure to return home. My wife wasn't happy living there anymore. My parents wanted to see their granddaughter and, on the way, grandson. But for me, the decision to leave was excruciating, and one I still struggle with to this day. But leave we did. It was time to start over again. I'd been an IT director in the Marshall Islands, but had an immediate opportunity with my brother-in-law to work as a mortgage broker in Laguna Beach. I knew nothing about real estate, but I also had known nothing about technology, so what the heck? I decided to give it the old college try. Little did I realize I was walking into the beginning of the second biggest housing bubble in history. It was 2002, and my career was set to take off like a rocket ship. The epicenter of the subprime mortgage market was Orange County, California. Long Beach Savings and Loan were pioneers in this market and soon drew the interest of Wall Street. Once the larger banks started getting involved, the mayhem escalated. I was a frontline soldier pressing high-risk loans to anyone who could fog up a mirror. The movie The Big Short does the best portrayal of what happened during those years. There was very little they got wrong in that movie. It was bananas. Soon the money really started pouring in, success got a hold of me, and life just kept getting better, or so I thought. I hadn't attended church in years. My spiritual life was basically non-existent, but I wasn't oblivious to what was going on around me. I didn't cheat on my wife, but I paid our bills and even purchased a brand new home in San Clemente. I was doing all the right things, mostly, and rationalizing anything I did with statements like, well, we just don't need that much square footage, or my pickup truck is all I really need. A BMW would be nice, but that's way over the top. I was very good at the comparison game. What I wasn't good at was managing my drinking, but of course I thought I was. I'd found a way to control how much I drank every night so as to not have a hangover or affect my work. But I knew exactly, up to the very edge, how much that was, and up to the edge I went almost every night. I ran 5 to 7 miles, 5 days a week, and soon opened my own mortgage company. I was managing everything just fine, thank you very much. Saturdays in the falls were my days. During the months of September and October, the baseball playoffs were heating up, college and pro football seasons kick off, and horse racing, where the surf meets the turf in Del Mar, goes off every single day. A sports lover's paradise, and Saturday was the day when almost everything was happening all at once. My Saturdays usually started around 10 a.m. down at the local sports bar. A Bloody Mary followed by a few beers along with the Big Ten early games was my breakfast of champions. The afternoon saw the Pac-10 kick off and then the ponies at Del Mar. And all my golfing buddies would show up throughout the day, and there I was through all of it. Not just in the morning, not just in the afternoon, all day long. It was getting around 7 p.m., halftime of the USC game, and my neighbor Pete and I were chatting at the corner of the bar when his eyes opened wide, staring at something behind me. Trev, your wife and kids are standing behind you. Yep, there they were, standing right in the doorway of a very loud and crowded sports bar, a very unhappy wife, a 5 and a 3-year-old, staring at their long-drinking dad. Ouch. For some, this kind of story would be treated with reprehension and disdain, but at the time, it quickly blew over. Remember, mayhem reigns as the ultimate currency among the drinking crowd. That type of incident didn't happen again, but it did happen. However, the ramifications were almost non-existent. I kept being a good provider, husband, father. Most alcoholics I know have similar stories. Sure, if you drink a bunch of isopropyl alcohol or take off on a high-speed drunken chase with police, bad things are going to happen really, really fast. But for some, that's their path, quick and dirty. Mine, however, was not. It was slow, measured, subtle, and almost inconsequential, until one day, it is consequential. You seem like you have plenty to say. I am a good listener. After the devastation of my wife leaving me, I had a lot on my plate and 2 teenagers to take care of and a new job to look for, and coming up with some sort of a plan to hold it all together. My dad called me, told me over the phone, he says, you know, it might be paramount for you and the kids if you can stay as sober as possible for a while. Boy, was he right about that. It was then AA popped into my head. I knew nothing about it other than you go to a couple of meetings and everything gets better, right? I got online to find where a meeting was and chuckled when I discovered there were dozens of meetings all over town going off almost every hour of the day. Shocker, the town with 20+ breweries has a drinking problem. Who knew? It was almost lunch and I noticed a meeting was set to start right in the middle of town. I thought, what do I got to lose? So I jumped into my truck, drove downtown, parked by the library, and walked down the ramp into the basement of a church. I sat down in the second row of a small room with about 20 or so people milling around. The meeting began and the leader started with a prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The meeting continued. There were announcements, an offering, and a surprising amount of ceremony, all practiced by the participants with quiet reverence. Sound familiar? It was then that the leader asked if there were any birthdays today. I was perplexed at what that had to do with drinking, but soon realized what was happening when one at a time an individual who would identify themselves as Joe, Cindy, Mac, etc., and having gone 24 hours, 6 months, or even 3 years without a drink. After identifying themselves, they were congratulated by the group, given a hug by the leader and a gold coin. Wow, I don't ever remember seeing this on television. The leader then progressed to 30 days without a drink. I looked at the date on my watch and it was Monday, August 7th. I had put down my first drink on June 26th at 5:30 p.m. I think she's talking to me. Hi, my name is Trevor, and well, I'm an alcoholic. And then it hits you. All the lies that you've told yourself year after year after year, all the coping, shortcuts and games you played, all of them collapse right there in an instant. And there you are. Nobody to blame, nobody to point to, just me. That day I got a phone list, a 24-hour chip, a 30-day chip, and a big hug. I now had something, though, to look forward to. Within a couple of weeks, I'd found a new, albeit poorly paying job across the river from the church where I attended those AA meetings. And every day I would take my lunch by walking to an AA meeting. I got more accustomed to how the meetings worked and soon got to know some folks. I slowly started building up enough courage to share a little bit with the group, and as my confidence built over the days and weeks, I noticed how the people around me, outside of AA, started to change. They were loud, obnoxious, and appeared to be very unsettled all the time. I began to see how my friends would talk about the dumbest things in the world, spend countless hours on pointless topics and observations, and of course, all between a cold beer or a cocktail. I still was not drinking, but I was becoming more and more frustrated with life. One Friday in a meeting, I started sharing some of my frustrations to the group. I think I got pretty animated. After the meeting, an older gentleman came up to me and said, "You seem like you have plenty to say. I'm a good listener." He handed me his card and left the meeting. Incredulous, I thought, is this guy asking if I need a sponsor, maybe? I thought about his offer all weekend and called him Sunday night and accepted. Bruce B. was now my sponsor. Bruce and I began meeting at a local Starbucks once a week, where he slowly and patiently began walking me through the big book and the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the first things I remember Bruce telling me about the big book was that it was basically the Bible in short form. As we walked through the steps, I began to understand what he meant. At this point, I hadn't been to church in over 20 years. My life had morphed into an existence of doing whatever I felt like, doing whenever I wanted to, whatever day it was. Now I found myself attending AA meetings at noon, 5 to 6 days a week, meeting for an hour plus once a week with my sponsor. The pattern was emerging. Sundays were always the hardest for me during that time because it was the only day I didn't have a meeting or a job to attend. I've always been an early riser. My kids liked to sleep in, and I was alone. So one smoky Sunday, not unlike today, I decided I would just go to church. What could it hurt? I jumped in my truck and drove over to Westside Church and just walked in the door. I sat down in the back of the litly dimmed sanctuary. The service went on as I had remembered in church from my earlier years. Song service, announcements, testimony, and concluded with a sermon. I remember starting to tear up watching all the people singing and praising God. And I asked Heavenly Father, how on earth did I end up back here? I managed to pull it together and stayed for the entire service. Later that evening, impressed with my experience at church, I got on the website and signed up for a daily devotional reading plan. Grace Notes by Jim Stevens. Jim was in the middle of a yearly Bible reading plan and happened to be in my least favorite book, Job. In the span of a few short weeks, I was now attending AA meetings, meeting with a sponsor, attending church every Sunday, and reading my Bible every morning. What is going on with me? Sandy, can you hand me that remote? This guy is driving me nuts. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, September of 2008, when I looked at the mostly empty bar at Cascade Lakes Brewery and heard this guy say those words. He was leaning up against the window that looked out over to the Chandler and Century roundabout and was watching something on ESPN when I heard him bark those words out to Sandy, the daytime bartender. He exhibited all the grace of Oscar Madison from The Odd Couple. His name was Glenn, and I liked him immediately. My time in San Clemente had ended badly. The real estate crash of 2008 hit us especially hard. I lost our home, I shut down my business, filed for bankruptcy, and moved everyone to Bend in August of 2008 to start over with no plan and knowing no one. I'd managed to save a little money that sustained our family for almost a year, but that soon ran out. And the next thing I know, we had to get on food stamps. Depressed and demoralized, my wife and I began turning more to the bottle. Nothing remarkably really happened for almost a decade. We scraped by, took no vacations, drank at home in the evenings, and went out drinking Friday night. Our kids got older. On weekends, we took them to all the sports programs they were involved in. Around the holidays, we watched their Christmas programs. I decided to get out of real estate and was going to teach myself to program. I woke up every morning, got the kids ready for school, and banged my head against the wall for 8 to 10 hours trying to make sense of this programming thing. This went on for years. Eventually, I landed a job at a local software development company, and the money situation got better, but our lives really hadn't changed at all. A typical week looked something kind of like this. Monday through Thursday, coffee, get kids ready for school. Code until 5, then cocktail or beer number 1, cocktail or beer number 2, and if it was Thursday, maybe cocktail or beer number 3. Friday, same as Thursday, but knock off around 3 and meet Glenn for drinks. Drink at one bar and keep the counter to less than 4 drinks. Move to another bar, reset the counter. Get home early before the cops come out. Come home and pour a little hair of the dog. Weekends. I think you get the picture. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Now let's be clear here. No one breaks down and documents their weeks like this. I mean, who would want to? Why don't you try it? Life is much more subtle than that. We make choices and decisions about our lives in small, hourly increments. Life just flows from one thing to the next. Steady, slow, imperceptible to what is really going on. It's the imperceptibility of this life that allows the more dangerous behaviors to find their way into our lives. The weekly list I just mentioned is a baseline list, a best case scenario, if you will. Sprinkled and sometimes dumped into any one of those days are 3 drinks instead of 2, or maybe 8. Perhaps the night before was a little harsher than normal, and the soccer to-go coffee might have a little splash of something in it to take the edge off. Or maybe just forego the coffee altogether and stick with just the splash. Whoopsie-daisy, a little bit more poured in there than I was expecting. My life was just this, a slow, mostly harmless ebb and flow between work, home, soccer fields, and bars. I drank, my wife drank, Glenn drank, and everybody I knew drank. My kids were growing up. I was getting older. I loved my wife and kids. Life wasn't perfect, but was good enough. Nothing was wrong. And then one day it was. You look just like your picture on Facebook. It was the fall of 2017. I'd gotten my 90-day sobriety chip and was starting to think about the 6-month chip that would fall the day after Christmas. I'd found a new job that allowed me to work, that allowed me to walk to my noon AA meetings over lunch, and I'd gotten through the book of Job in my daily devotionals and was progressing through the rest of the Bible. My sponsor, Bruce, and I were really starting to click, and it felt like a real relationship was forming. Church at Westside was becoming more enjoyable and something I really looked forward to each week. When the pastor of Westside announced a new Bible study series that would be starting soon, I decided to take a chance and try one. The Bible study groups were called Blue Groups, and they were church members who would open their homes to groups of 10 or 12. I approached the sign-up area, with Westside being as big as it is, there were dozens and dozens of homes scattered all across Bend to choose from. I looked at the first page and then the second. A name and address somehow got my attention that was near River's Edge Golf Course. Is that right? And I put my name down on the list. My wife had been gone now for several months by this time, and I'd been waiting for the inevitable knock on the door from the sheriff to be served with divorce papers. Her life had accelerated into the glamour zone. Everything was going great for her. Her new life was amazing. At least that's what Facebook said. Divorce is a very strange thing. There's this person you get to know and that you like so much you start spending all your time with them. Eventually you stand in front of some important-looking people and promise to spend all your time with each other forever. Children usually pop up not long after that. And the next thing you know, there's this whole group of people living in your house that all look the same. And then one day, one of them says, I don't want to live here anymore. And they leave. And that's it. I didn't want a divorce. I loved my family and my wife. It was no secret, however, that she was involved with somebody else. She wasn't hiding it anymore. One evening, I had volunteered to be the scorekeeper for my daughter's water polo at the Juniper Pool. The setup is familiar with the bleachers and the parents on one side of the pool facing the scorer's table on the other side of the pool. So I arrived and sat down across the pool from the scorer's table and received some brief instructions on how to work the clock and the scoring buttons. I glanced up and there they were, marching across the pool deck in front of all the parents. Hand in hand was my wife and her new boyfriend. They sat down next to me at the scorer's table across from all the parents we had known for years. I guess there just weren't any more seats available in the stands. I'd been talking with my dad about how the sheriff had still not come by and why everything was taking so long. We discussed what the Bible had to say about divorce. Abandonment? Check. Infidelity? Check. And unequally yoked came up. The Apostle Paul advises, although not ideal, that it's better to be a believer to influence the other one, right? So you're telling me there's a chance. It wasn't long after the pool incident that I stumbled across a YouTube video titled, "Don't be surprised if God runs off your non-believing spouse." The video was devastating. By this time, it had become very, very clear that my life was the one that had changed. Something was happening to me that I could not explain. Holding hands in AA meetings, reciting the Lord's Prayer, reading my Bible and praying every day. Trevor, the partier? What? I was alone, scraping by, a single dad, no friends, and now publicly humiliated. Is this the bottom? I have one more verse that I'd like to read, if you don't mind. I'm close. If you're getting sleepy, I promise it's getting close. Hebrews 12, starting in verse 5. Hebrews 12, starting in verse 5. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? And here the author, probably Paul, quoting Proverbs. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you're left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us a short time as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. So was I at the bottom? Hardly. Something had happened to me. I was learning about progress, not perfection, one day at a time. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Step 3 states, make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. I filed for divorce in October 2017, and the divorce was finalized in February of 2018. We were together for 23 years and married for 19. The Blue Group Bible study I'd signed up for turned into a real hit. I was the 9th wheel of a 4-couple group that clicked really, really well. So well that we all decided to keep meeting every other week after the Blue Group study had ended. It was after several months of meeting that one of the wives came up to me and said, Trevor, are you SDA by any chance? Don't forget, this is a Sunday church. I stopped dead in my tracks. I guess so. She said, Jeff, and I thought so because of how good your knowledge is of the Bible stories. Train up a child in a way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. Thanks, Mom and Dad. That couple who asked me if I was a Seventh-day Adventist, the couple who had put their names down on that giant list of sign-ups at Westside Church right next to mine, were Jeff and Jennifer Griswold. Some here might remember them as members of this church before they moved to Tennessee. We laughed about how you can't ever escape the Adventist community and marveled how Jeff and I both had graduated from Loma Linda Academy. The holidays passed, the Central Oregon spring started showing signs of life, and this new life of mine was chugging right along. I was over 6 months sober, attending AA meetings nearly every day, attending Westside Church, and keeping up with Jim Stevens' daily Bible reading plan. In March of 2018, spring roared unexpectedly into Central Oregon. The warm weather was begging everyone to come outside, and so the bi-weekly, now extended Blue Group Bible study met for a barbecue and a fellowship. The 9 of us were all sitting around after eating, and Jennifer Griswold and the other wives, in somewhat of a teasing tone, came up to me and said, Trevor, have you started dating yet? Oh boy. No, I said, I've been taking a year off. This was a promise I'd made to my sponsor, Bruce, when we'd first met. I'd asked him when the clock should start on this timeout. And he asked, what day was your first day being sober? June 26, I said. He said, then that's the day the clock started, he replied. Jennifer persisted on her line of questioning by following up with, so well, how long has it been? 10 months, I guess. By this time, everyone was engaging in the conversation and piling on when one of the girls blurted out, well, 10 months is long enough. I know this girl. We all had a good laugh at my expense, and although the idea of meeting someone new was intriguing, I just let it go and quickly returned to my routine. The irony of this matchmaking opportunity was that I had been praying nearly every day for God to send me a nice Christian girl, and here were a group of Christian women at a Christian gathering trying to set me up with someone who was probably Christian. Right over my head. It was not long after my former wife had left that I realized very quickly that in Bible parlance, we weren't really equally yoked. It's a real thing, and the Bible spells out the danger for it for a reason. My ex-wife wasn't a heathen, and neither were her wonderful parents and family. None of them, however, were practicing believers, and neither was I really for over 20 years. When I hit rock bottom and my life was in shambles, God carefully laid out all of the pieces on the garage floor of my life so that I could see what I had built and destroyed by myself. He's very good at that. Like the FAA examining the individual pieces of flight wreckage, there was my life. I reflected on all the decisions I had made over the years before finding sobriety, the forks in the road I'd taken, the paths that were illuminated that I had ignored. I knew if I took my life into my own hands, I would fail. I could not do all of this by myself anymore, so I did the only thing I could think of. I got down on my knees every day before work and prayed for God to send me a nice Christian girl. Sunday, April 1st, 2018, I was planning on attending the Easter service at Westside Church. I got up early and the yard was a mess. I decided to take a few piles of leaves in the yard, rake a few pile of leaves, and that I'd neglected in the fall, and the next thing I knew, it was almost lunch and I had missed church. There was still a lot more work to do, so I plugged along all afternoon. After getting cleaned up, I was fixing myself something to eat, and my phone dinged. It was Jennifer. She wasn't going to give up. The next day on my way home after work, I started noticing some butterflies rattling around in my stomach. It had been a while since I'd called a girl. A really long while. I decided to wait and call this girl at 5:30 after work. It was probably one of the longest 30 minutes of my life. 5:30 came and I dialed the number. Hello, is this Mindy? Yes. Hi, Mindy, this is Trevor Chenestudy. Jennifer Griswold gave me your number. We ended up talking later that evening as Mindy was having a women's Bible study at her home. Little did I know, but her Bible study group had been praying for a nice Christian man. We talked for almost an hour. The month of April seemed to be turbocharged. The time flew. Mindy and I began texting every couple of days, and soon every day. We wrote letters to one another, and I began talking on the phone regularly with her as well. I liked her. She was funny. The day came when we discussed meeting face to face. Mindy lived in Salem, and my daughter had a water polo tournament at Mount Hood Community College in Gresham. It was close enough. Early Sunday morning on April the 28th, I drove over to the Sandium Pass to meet Mindy at Taproot Cafe in Salem for breakfast. I arrived a little early, found a booth facing the front door, sat down and waited. It had been raining that morning, as it often does in the Willamette Valley, but the sun was starting to break through the clouds and a warm glow was rising up the windows of the restaurant. It smelled wet, clean, the hint of bacon and coffee. The front door opened, and with the antique creak of a downtown building and the morning sun, it lit up the entrance. There she was. Her eyes scanned around the room, found me, smiled, and walked over to the booth. She took off her raincoat, sat down, and said incredulously, "You look just like your picture on Facebook." Mindy and I hit it off immediately, and after our first meeting, we started alternating weekends, driving over the pass to see one another. It wasn't long before we started dreading Sunday evenings and having to say goodbye. One afternoon while on the phone, we were lamenting how hard it was to say goodbye, and I said, well, I guess if we were married, we wouldn't have this problem. "Are you asking me to marry me?" she said. "I guess I am," I replied. "Mindy, will you marry me?" Mindy and I were married at the end of summer on September 23, 2018. Start to finish, from first call to standing in front of the preacher, was 120 days, or 4.5 months. That's fast. But when you know, you know. Everyone loves a story with a happy ending, and Mindy and I both have stories with happy endings. But the story is not over. Life still goes on. Problems and challenges arise every day. My friend Glenn died by suicide. I still must stay sober, and I have 2 adult children who know next to nothing about God, and I raised them that way. I have an app on my phone that breaks down the sobriety that I have. As of today, I've been sober for 7 years, 1 month, 17 hours, and 20 minutes. Thank you. If you're really interested, the app breaks it down by, it's 85 months, 2,594 days, 62,000 hours not wasted, 3.5 million minutes, $28,000 saved, 15,000 hours saved, and 1.4 million calories saved. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous has given me all of that. But I also have another app, and it's not on my phone. It's this. The 11th step states, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. This is sometimes referred to as one of the maintenance steps, and for whatever reason, it stood out and I've kept it. Each morning, I arise every day early and work through a yearly Bible reading plan. I could not stay sober without reading the Word of God every day. Thank you, Jim Stevens. Addiction takes many, many forms: drugs, alcohol, sex, food, gambling, internet, materialism, and scores of other self-destructive behaviors can affect any of us and lead us down the path of darkness. As the changes kept coming during my early days of recovery, I kept asking, what on earth is happening to me? And honestly, if I stand here and look out at all of you, I kind of have to say, how on earth did I end up here? I have no idea. My dad told me over the phone once, you know, God may have been working on you for longer than you think. They don't call him the Hound of Heaven for nothing. In Revelation 3:20, Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him, and he with me. We're thankfully not all the same types of people. God doesn't approach us all the same either. He approached Moses in the burning bush. With Gideon, he patiently provided the signs that Gideon kept asking for. Jonah was swallowed by a whale. With Mary, he quietly and gently explained what he was going to do for her. For some, he stands at the door and knocks. For others, he must knock a little bit louder. It doesn't matter, he won't stop knocking. Would you bow your heads in prayer, please? Lord, make me a channel of thy peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, where there is doubt, I may bring faith, where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek to comfort rather than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds. It is by forgiving that one is forgiven. And it is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Thank you for letting me share all of this today. This is my story, and I'm sticking to it.